all. I have no issue jumping on a podcast with friends, easy as.
Cool, cool.
Good.
Yeah, that's Carl Woods, our colleague and friend. Thanks for joining us, Carl. We're looking forward to diving into a chat with you. Fascinating chat, I'm sure. Thanks for being with us. And it's a bit of a rollout today. So we've got Ian and Keith with us. Ian, you okay? You good?
Yes, very well. Thank you, Martin. Just down the
Good.
road from Carl now. So we
Yeah.
already had a coffee catch up and we're ready to go again.
Good. And Keith?
Yeah, I wouldn't miss this one, Martin. Yeah, Carl, a good colleague over the years. And yes, it's good to welcome him to the Brisbane area. Although you are from Queensland originally, aren't you, Carl? Even though you were living in Melbourne before.
Yeah, that's actually probably a pretty good segue. I grew up in Adelaide, in the Adelaide Hills, actually, and my mum and dad still live there. Still, my sister and brother-in-law and nieces and nephews, closer to the CBD in Adelaide. But no, I grew up there, and have kind of been traveling Australia, I guess, since when did I leave? Maybe since 2010, 2011. So a good 10, 11, 12 years now. So it's, I've been to Queensland, lived in Queensland before, but back here now. It's kind of always felt like home, Queensland. So I like to say I'm an adopted Queenslander. My wife's a Queenslander, so I'll stick with supporting the Maroons come state of origin.
Right.
So if there's any Australian listeners, we've just turned off all the New South Welshmen. Yeah, I'm with it. Here's Woodsy. Nice. So just as a kick-off, then I think it might be really interesting for people that don't know you and your work. Is maybe just if you could give us a bit of a history of sort of where you started in terms of research and applied work, and sort of where you are now, because it is quite different. I think, if that's fair to say, there's a bit of a shift at some point. I know that's a bit of a very broad, and you could be here for the next 2 hours doing that. But yeah, if you could give us sort of an overview, Carl, that would be brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'll keep it relatively short. As I said, I grew up in Adelaide, where I did my undergraduate and honours degree, and was really fortunate at the University of South Australia to have crossed paths with Annette Rayner, who, for those that are unfamiliar with her work, really specialised in developmental coordination disorder, but took a real dynamic systems approach to the subsequent analysis, movement analysis, and then struck up a really nice working friendship with her. And she ended up moving to Edith Cowan University in Western Australia, in Perth, who at the time are a very, very strong leader in sports science, and different elements of sports science, specifically strength and conditioning, but had an emerging movement science program. And so I was very fortunate at the 2011 to have obtained a PhD scholarship and went and studied with her, and was there for 3 years. During that time, I was concurrently working with the West Australian Football Commission, working with the developmental athletes, so under 16s and under 18 footballers who were some of the best in the country, who have now gone on. Quite a few of them have gone on to have really successful careers within the Australian Football League, so the premier Australian football code here. And completed my PhD in 2014, and was really fortunate to land a teaching research position with James Cook University in skill acquisition motor learning, which are in far north Queensland, in Townsville. So for those that are unfamiliar with Australia, jump on and have a look at a map, and you can see how far that is apart from one another. It's quite literally, one's the bottom of the southwest coast and the other is on the far northeast coast. So it was a fair hike, and for a kid that had grown up in the southern parts of the country, it was quite different for lots of reasons, geographically, climactically, politically. It was quite a different shift, a very slower lifestyle. And fortunately for me, Ian and Keith, you'd both resonate with this, having spent time. Ian, you're still here in Queensland, but Keith, having spent time in Queensland, I moved in April, so the weather was beautiful in North Queensland. The rest of the country was going through winter, and I was sitting there under palm trees, smoking cigars, having a great time. So was there for a few years. Absolutely fell in love with the place, and some really wonderful colleagues at James Cook University, which I still have today. And then at around 2016, I was contacted by some old colleagues who were working for an AFL team back in Adelaide, the Port Adelaide Football Club, and asked if I would be willing to help consult with them on some issues that they had with regards to practice design, which I jumped at. So by this stage, my research had kind of pivoted from fostering ways of helping young athlete development, specifically using different types of data sets to help identify potential areas for intervention, to now focusing a little bit more on the broader design of practice tasks and how we can leverage things more so from an ecological perspective to create rich environments. And all of this coincided with my integration into an ecology department at James Cook University, working really closely with some ecologists who taught me some cool analytical techniques from ecology, which I subsequently bled into sports science. So kind of integrated this space of skill acquisition, performance analysis, technology, and use that to help the football club design some really quirky practice tasks. And we got some success in 2016 off the back of that. And then fast forward a year, and I was fortunate to be offered a full-time role to lead coaching science, innovation, performance analysis, and skill acquisition, which kind of a lot, but really a kind of innovative role in and of itself. There wasn't too many of those types of roles within the AFL, so kind of went in with a blank slate, and spent the first 6 months kind of engaging in a bit of an ethnography, I guess, kind of immersing myself in every part of the program, from my area, coaching, to high performance, to athlete welfare, to recruitment, kind of seeing how all these departments work or not with each other. And then, the back end of 2018, spent some time with a couple of assistant coaches, using all of that information to set about proposing a complete different way of engaging in performance preparation. And that led us to really go hard at bringing life to some of these ideas that Keith and Ian and Duard and many others had been talking about for a long time, and advancing a real ecological approach to performance preparation in professional Australian football. And that was really fun. Bringing that to life was a real exciting process for me. At the end of 2018, that's when Keith and I crossed paths. We wrote a couple of papers together, and I was picking his brain quite extensively on his thoughts on some of these ideas in terms of their integration. I was quite aware theoretically of the basis, but bringing them to life was not really my forte. So that was a real rich learning opportunity for me, and rolled the program out through the 2019 season, and had some real growth and success within that as well. All things were going really well. I still had a year to go on a contract, and was getting really excited to kind of take it to the next stage. We kind of rolled out a 3-phased approach, and so we were kind of halfway through, moving into the second phase, so like 1.5 of the way through, I guess. And then, as is the case, I got a phone call at the end of 2019, start of 2020, from an old colleague of mine, a friend of mine who I did my PhD with at Edith Cowan University, Sam Robertson. And he was at Victoria University. And he gave me a call and said, look, Damien Farrow has kind of just left, and we're really keen to fill the skill and expertise research leadership that he subsequently left. And it was kind of pretty hard to say no to going into a full-time research role. So while being quite happy working in the industry, I kind of had grown a bit of an interest in addressing some of these questions, which I'd been kind of navigating as an applied practitioner. So I was quite keen to kind of drive them again through writing some pieces and writing some papers and sharing the lessons that I learned along the way. And so yeah, we packed up again and moved to Melbourne in January 2020, and then the world shut down. We hit lockdown, and unfortunately for my wife and I, we copped the fair brunt of it in Melbourne. I think it was the most shut down or lockdown city in the world, which was a bit of a wild experience. But I was quite quite fortunate in that I'd had that afforded me an opportunity to really delve into a lot of these ideas and concepts that I was keen to explore through the last few years of kind of working in the industry and developing these ideas embryonically, at least at James Cook University. And so that really gave me a couple of years to sink my teeth into some of this stuff. And that's where Keith and I kind of took it up a gear and integrated some work with some other wonderful colleagues, James Rudd, Dwight, Mark O'Sullivan, Rick Shuttleworth, a lot of our colleagues and friends, yourself, Martin. We wrote some pieces together, and really took these ideas to what I think was another level. But that kind of coincided with this real interest at the same time in 2020. Well, I guess to take a few steps back in kind of 2014, 2015, my mum had bought me this book because I've always had this interest in non-Western ways of doing, so non-Western kind of epistemology. And my mum had bought me this book, and I'd kind of just sat on the shelf for a while. And then when COVID hit, I had an opportunity to do some more reading, picked up this book, and kind of inadvertently had stumbled into some of the work of Tim Ingold, and was fascinated with his ideas. It was a kind of like an epiphany. Some of these things that I'd been thinking about kind of had fallen into place after reading some of his work. And that just, it's like I kind of felt like I struck a bit of a gold vein, and just these ideas just kind of started cascading out of this work. And I couldn't get enough of his work. So kind of consumed everything that he was writing at the time, sent him some emails, had some discussions with him, fleshed some of these ideas out further. For those that don't know, Tim Ingold, he's a social anthropologist. So it's a quite weird space for a sports scientist to be spending time in. But where we found similarity is in our metatheoretical orientation. He was one of the first to integrate Gibsonian psychology, ecological psychology, into anthropology. And so while our contexts might be slightly different, the way we viewed learning, skill, education was very, very similar. So then, yeah, we spent a few years exploring those ideas. And that progressed. And then in 2023, I took on a research leadership role at Victoria University, where I looked after sport research as a whole, which had a couple of different research themes within it. That was kind of my first insight to research leadership, which was pretty fun. And then yeah, somewhere in amongst that, maybe in 2024 last year, my kind of wife and I reached this point of thinking it's about time we grew up. We just got married, and thought, let's look at the next stage of our life and what that would subsequently look like. We loved living in Melbourne, but neither of us felt like that was home. And then rather fortunately, an opportunity came up at the University of Queensland as an associate professorial role in sports science, with a real specialisation in skill acquisition, and an opportunity kind of to split that role with the Queensland Academy of Sport, where I now lead learning design, the learning design department. So it's kind of a role that I'm in, where I'm able to kind of address two major themes of research interest: theoretical advancements to the field, those that are familiar with my research, and the types of writing and the way I write with colleagues would be quite aware maybe of the theoretical and philosophical bent to my work. But I concurrently have a real applied interest in bringing life to these ideas, working with coaches and athletes and bringing them into the research process. And kind of sharing the stories of working in high performance sport. And so, yeah, that's where I find myself now. I had a bit of a relationship with John Kearney and Veronica Richards prior to coming to UQ. So it's been fascinating to kind of reinvigorate those relationships and kind of have these interesting discussions from slightly different meta-theoretical positions. But having been here now 6 weeks, it's been a pretty fun process. So yeah, look at that, Martin. I said I'd wrap it up quickly, and I'm still going. So
and he's only 25, all that, and he's only 25, Carl. Well, he looks 25, yeah.
Well,
Sorry,
I mean,
Pete.
yeah, what I was going to say there, I mean, that really was fascinating because it's a genuine, for me, it's a genuine, it's worth really hearing that in detail and observing somebody who genuinely finds a way, follows their trajectory, if you like, because when I first met you, Carl, quite wrongly, and we all do this, but quite wrongly, I pigeonholed you as a technologist, data-driven, analytics type person. I mean, you had a wonderful leader there with Sam Robertson, so I knew Sam from that background, and I thought you'd be the same, very quantitative driven, etc. But you have moved so comfortably between quantitative research and qualitative research, quantitative theories, qualitative theories, into the social anthropology field, etc., linked with psychology. And it's a bit of a cliche at times when we talk about multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary approaches, but I think you genuinely showed that. And you've also developed the research skills to go with the interest. And on top of that, you've got this sort of, you switched very easily and smoothly, like there are no barriers between practical, applied, practitioner work, applied sports science type stuff at an elite level in a high performance sport, not just sort of at a level, where it's kind of at a much lower level, but, where the stakes are really high, and at the highest levels in academia. As well. So that is, for anyone listening to your synopsis of your career, that is, something really to think about from their perspective there, not to be bound in little areas and little pots, but to move smoothly. But you need to put the work in, and you've done that. You haven't sort of said, oh no, I don't know, I'm not a social anthropologist, I can't possibly get into ecological techniques, etc. You've done that, you've pursued that. And it was the same with Greg Souder, wasn't it, Martin, when the podcast with Greg Souder earlier this week? He's the same, he switched between areas as he needed them.
Yeah, I think to that point, Keith, I think if you were to say to me 10 years ago, this is the type of work you would be doing, I would be quite startled at that. And it's something I'm quite vocal on for a lot of my postgraduate students. It starts so simply, but follow the curiosity that you have, and don't let the borders that are artificial constrain where that curiosity leads you. I'm sure I've had a lot of colleagues over the years kind of go, oh, he's delving into some rather peculiar areas, and he's writing in rather peculiar ways. But I must admit, I've found that a much more enriching way of doing, because the border between Carl as the scientist and Carl as the person that has all these other interests is much more fluid, and it's a much fuller way of taking up with the work. But yeah, that comes with lots of sacrifices, moving a lot. I've got a very supportive wife, which helps. But yeah, the big one for me is again, it runs the risk of being overly cliche, but really hold tight to that curiosity-driven element of the work that you do, and let that guide your inquiry, as opposed to a methodology that you often see, particularly in the sports sciences, which we might get to later, which I feel is a very methodological discipline, which kind of leads to this what John Vanderkamp and I are talking about at the moment, which leads to this reproduction via transmission. So we don't really go anywhere. We just keep reproducing the same stuff because we focus at a particular level that doesn't enable us to go beyond beyond that. So, but yeah, maintain a level of curiosity, I think, which again sounds overly cliched, but is very central to why we do what we do.
Great message, yeah.
I remember a position paper you wrote, Carl, not too long ago, and within it, I can't remember the name, but within it, you had the term publish or perish, and essentially, I think the basic premises of the paper, which I found interesting, was about, as an academic, from an academic perspective, be curious, don't be bound by disciplinary boundaries, and it's almost this idea of enrichment, isn't it? If you do follow interest and curiosity, it's maybe the way you think about things, it's just going to be enriched, it's beneficial, rather than just being pigeonholed into one area. I thought, yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, that piece was called Wayfinding Boundaries of Knowing, and I co-wrote that with Keith Duarte and another good colleague, a friend of mine, Ian McCune, and that basically what we tried to do there was advance a view of professional development of academics through a guise of amateurism. So what would it mean to be an amateur academic in sports science? And I think that this is another area of interest of mine, is kind of the roots or the etymology of words, because amateur has this kind of modern connotation of a dabbler or a hobbyist or a kind of a weekend warrior. But really, the kind of Latin verb of amateur is to love, right? This intransitive verb to love what you do. And I often think about like stamp collectors, like they can be doing anything at any one time. They could be on holiday in, in the UK, and all of a sudden they walk into a post office and see a stamp that they've been waiting for their entire life, and bang, off they go. Like that cascades with all these interests. And I often think about what I do in a similar thing. I could be out on the water, I could be going for a run, I could be, doing things that you would do in everyday life, and draw inspiration from those things, because you kind of have this deep enjoyment or love for what you do. Whereas on the flip side, if we're in a rush to over professionalize everything, we tend to put the outcomes ahead of those processes. So it becomes very like, I have to publish to maintain my job. So I'll just get on any paper I can, or I've got this data and I'm going to cut it up in multiple ways and analyze it in multiple ways so I can get 2 or 3 papers out of it. But nothing really eventuates from it. It's just the 3 or 4 publications that you get out of it, which you can stick on your CV, go to your manager at the end of the year and say, hey, look, my KPI has dictated that I need 3 papers. I needed $20,000 income, and done, tick, quit, sweet, I'm a professional academic. But I've tried to, Keith, myself, Duarte, and then tried to flip the narrative to kind of go, no, let's aspire not to be professionals, but to maintain an amateurism, which is why we do, or which is how we got into what we're doing in the first place. Clearly, you don't pursue a PhD and then carry on with research unless you love what you do. So situate that at the fore, not the professionalized metrics that come with it.
I think as well, Carl, one of the issues there is that in many universities in different countries across the world now, the politicians have decided that they can't trust the academics. I think that's going on in a massive country across the world, as we know at the moment. And this notion of not being able to trust the academics is a kind of a myth that's fed to populations. And so they brought in research assessment exercises of different types. I mean, I've worked as an academic in the UK, in Australia, New Zealand, just like Ian. And I've had to bear the burden of a research assessment exercise in all those areas. And it's all data driven, it's all metrics driven, but not in a good way, not in terms of developing ways of analyzing the impact. I mean, it's getting better in the UK now because they are monitoring impact. 25% of the next research assessment exercise, which is 2029, in the UK, 25% of that allocation is going to be the impact that your work causes, if you like. You provide the evidence of it, how it's impacted societal organizations and institutions. That's a bit better. But it used to be just how many publications, the frequency data and all this sort of stuff, not really delving into qualitative aspects of it. So all of that drives people away from originally what got them in there, to make them curious and interested in, how the body works, how we function in environments, and how we support performance and stuff. Really important things that fascinate us. Like stamp collecting, as you said, or train spotting, or bird watching, and it's moved us away to that.
It's just exactly the same for sport, though, Keith, isn't it? I'm just thinking young kids getting involved in sport. I mean, I think we've written about this, of course, certainly as, for the love of it, they want, the sensation of playing football or swimming or whatever it is, the social element as well. And
playing,
just playing the sport in with a freedom as well, pretending to be your favourite batsman or, whatever it might be. And then you find yourself, if you've shown a bit of ability, you find yourself in a pathway. And over time, that just gets, in some instances, will get taken away. It's just eroded away. It's a fascinating point, this idea of amateurism and doing it for the love of it.
It strikes me. Sorry, Carl. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just about to say, it's very, I often feel when we critique some of these things, to go back to your point, Keith, on the kind of over obsessive nature of metrics in academia, but in all parts of our life, right? Like we're obsessed with quantifying anything, and if we can't quantify it, it's clearly not that important. But what we're finding is the stuff that we're not quantifying is probably more important than the stuff we are quantifying. But it's hard to critique it too, because who's at fault, and I have this discussion with early career and mid-career researchers a lot. Who's at fault? The early career researcher who, and I've been in this position where your funding is anchored towards achieving these metrics, right? So what do you do? Like, I'm kind of lulled into having to play this game, because if I don't have a job.
That's right.
So it's very hard. It's
a real balancing act. I felt that.
Absolutely.
I felt that throughout my life, it really is. But I've always been the question that's all driven me, and I'm very clear about this. The question that always has driven me is, if this research assessment exercise went away and the government decided it's a waste of time, we're not going to do it anymore, would you still be researching? Absolutely. And that's what's kept me going, because it's that love of the area, love of what you're interested in, not just from an applied perspective, but of taking different perspectives on knowledge. And the other thing I detected it in your synopsis of your career, and listening to Greg Sauder earlier this week talk about his pathway into the way that he sort of supports mixed martial arts, etc., is that there is a subversive element to things, the way that we go about our work, and that definitely, I felt that, but without overdoing it. There's a bit of subversiveness in there, in terms of, you see what the status quo is. I mean, in skill acquisition, this was back in the 90s, the status quo was very solid, very dominant. I didn't like that one bit, and it was a case of not so much fighting like a guerrilla or terrorist or something like that, but genuinely pursuing this more ecological approach, because it felt authentic, it felt much more realistic, And so and Greg talked about this, the subversive nature. He talked about a school report, actually, which kind of almost identified him as a, future subversive person, really. And I think there is a subversive streak in people like that, who won't accept, this is the way we do things, or we've always done things this way, and are willing to change things, but not just randomly go about smashing things up. It's about finding a better way.
Carl, can I just link back to what you just said about the we can only measure measure things that we can measure. Like it reminded me of a little sketch Ross Pinder used to put up of the elephant looking under the light. What have you lost? Oh, whatever it was, a ring. Where did you lose it? Somewhere over there. Well, why are you looking here? Because it's in the light.
Yeah.
But I was thinking that when you said you worked in talent ID, and obviously with your role now at QAS, and there's this big drive now to 2032 and talent IDs coming up again. How are we going to make sure that we don't go back to measuring what we can measure in terms of talent development or talent ID, and we can measure height, we can measure jumping, we can measure that we know how limited that is in terms of spotting talent, but how are we going to make sure that we don't get locked into that again for 32 years after Sydney, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and particularly at the QAS we have a talent program, right, which is led by Alex Roberts, and who was also a few years after I'd gone through, was also a PhD graduate of Annette Rayners as well. And we've kind of crossed paths along the way, but it's an area of research that, and I'll be quite open about this, I actually am not really sure what the result or the answer would be to that question. And it's an area that I kind of have really fallen out of interest in because of the exact thing that you were saying. I kind of have found it very repetitive, in that I guess I'm a bit pessimistic of the very concept of talent from the get-go. And what, I guess I'll explain one of the reasons why I'm quite pessimistic about it, in that I think it starts from, and the idea of talent, that you can be talented or not talented, I really grapple with, because I think we can trace it back to this innateness, this innate argument that you're kind of born with gifts or you're born with these things. And I just fundamentally push back against that, because I don't believe that's how we develop. We're born, and we are born into a structured environment that is very constrained and cluttered, which we inadvertently our attention is educated to certain things based upon all these nested scales, right? So not just at an immediate local scale of attending to where the stuff is in the kitchen, but at a much bigger level of that as well, that I live in a house that has a kitchen. So I just push back against these ideas of talent and innateness from the get-go, right? So that's something I struggle with. But I guess if I was to really advocate for for at least learning from the mistakes I think we've made in the past, and I'll absolutely put my hand up for that. I've contributed to a research discourse which I actually don't like anymore, right? And there's an uncomfort associated with that, but that just comes, I think, with being quite reflective, responsive, and quite kind of aware of the pitfalls of what we've done previously. But I think if we were to go down this assessment path for trying to nudge younger athletes into certain sports that they might be well equipped for, I just can't. I can't shake the idea of you need to contextualize what we're actually assessing at all times. Like the standing height, sprint speed, all of these things are very capacious in their measures. I was having a chat with a strength and conditioning coach today, for example, and I said, I wonder how different the field of strength and conditioning would be if we didn't look at their role as, in capacious terms, as a capacity filler, right? Your job isn't to get athletes stronger and faster. Your job is to help attune these skills that athletes have. How different would it be if we looked at sprint speed, if we looked at strength, and not as capacities, but as skills? And then as a result of that, what would that mean for how we develop them? And what would that mean for how we identify, whatever that might mean, how we identify these things? Well, straight away, if we're looking at them as skills don't, as you have mentioned many a time, Keith, they don't occur in a vacuum. They're very contextual, right? So straight away, we need to make sure that when we're identifying or assessing, it's in a context that is at least representative of what the athletes or the prospective athletes are going to have to work towards. And Ross and yourself, Ian and Keith, have done some wonderful work, 2011, 12, 13, on talent as a concept and talent identification from a representative design perspective, which I don't think has had enough. I'll probably embarrass you both here. I don't think has had enough attention in that space, to be fair. I think we still run the risk of measuring things because they're easy to measure, as opposed to really thinking critically about why we're measuring what we're measuring and how we're measuring what we're measuring. I don't know if that answers your question, Ian.
It's like Ian said, you know, it's like the metaphor of the person searching for something where the light is, rather than where the actual thing is, because that's harder. If you see what you know. So for me, what you're talking about there, you know, makes a lot of sense, Carl. You know, we really neglected functionality. You know, basically working on how to understand how people actually function, rather than as you mentioned before, reproducing a technique, a classical procedure, or like a playbook way of doing something. And some coaches and talent specialists think, well, that's the way that, you know, this, find a seminal classical way of performing, I don't know, a forehand drive or a sprint start or something like this, a takeoff in the jump, and then that's what you're looking for, you know, when it's about looking at functionality, how somebody performs, because functionality means basically adapting your skills to the different contexts of environment as the environment changes. And not enough of that goes on in skills practice, but also in skills assessment as well, you know, in conditions so people can perform.
Yeah, it reminded me of a session I did in New Zealand, where one of the major associations asked me, what skill sets do our 13-year-olds need? You know, and it was in the context of rugby union. And I said, well, what's the average debut age of a debutant for the All Blacks? And they said, oh, about 24. I said, so you wanting to tell me what somebody's going to need in 10 years' time? So we don't even know what sport is going to look like in 10 years' time. We don't know what the rule changes are going to be. So you're asking for an impossibility. And it just came back to me as the point you made, Keith, is we need players who are adaptable, who can solve problems. And if we spend our time working, helping people do decision making in context, and the other thing I think where there's massive opportunities is to try and make the junior games more representative of the adult games in terms of the way that they look and feel. So by action scaling and body scaling, so that there's not such a huge jump, you know, like being brilliant at 14 in this game with this group of kids in this doesn't look anything like being successful at 24 in this game. But we could design better games or better junior programs. And I think
I guarantee if a 13-year-old started to try and play like a 24-year-old, none of the other kids would understand that, and that player will be playing by themselves there and making a lot of mistakes, getting blamed for it.
Yeah. I see the disconnect between high performance sport and junior sport. You know, oh no, that's the beginning, you know, that's the social game. They're the people who are coming into this. So what would you want when they come into your system? What do you want? So when you're at Port, you know, or in Perth, Carl, when you got the 16, 18-year-olds, what did the coaches want from these players when they came into the program? What did they want? You know, like when would they be ready?
Yeah, and that in itself is a very complex question on multiple levels, because again, it's hard to address those questions without realizing the contexts that they come from. And what I mean by that is the funding model, right, of those programs is geared towards getting young players drafted into an AFL system. So a large part of our profile was trying to design practice tasks and activities to show the kind of magnitude of skills that these players have, in the hope that a recruiter will go, yeah, there's someone that we want to draft and get them into a system, because the funding of these programs is built off of that. And that goes back to that point I was trying to make earlier. It's really hard to critique the way things are done when the whole system has been set up for people to play to be lulled into having to play these inadvertent games. The very concept, I guess, if you think about it too, the very concept of trying to identify talent for 2032 is a very strange one in and of itself. But again, it's hard to divorce that from the narrative of how good that would be for the Queensland government to show, hey, look, these kids have been identified in this regional town, and now they're off winning a medal, or at least competing in a medal opportunity at our home games. So it's very hard to critique when livelihoods, ways of being and doing are entangled into these systems. So that said too, like, make no mistake, that doesn't mean that they're not free from critique. Absolutely not. But it does mean that, if we're going to be serious about trying to instigate change, we need to attack the root of some of these things, not necessarily just the methodological level that these things are done on, which is probably a bigger issue I'm tackling with these days in sports science as a discipline as a whole.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, Martin and I, we spoke to Greg Southern earlier this week, and we talked about the issue of system capture, didn't we, Martin? Something that Rick Shuttleworth and I have spoken about, where the system takes on a life of its own, and the people that kind of enter the system become captured by it, and there's kind of like groupthink that captures them in that, and that's the way that we've always done things, and the so-called path dependency, etc. But this is what I meant before, is that it is very hard to change the system in a formal way. And I think that probably an informal way of the system changing over time, things changing, is this subversiveness. Very subtle, not going in and blowing things up and, just randomly smashing up things, etc. But, it's subtly challenging things and showing that there is a different way of doing things, and people have done that. We've seen some good examples of mentioned of people who've done that, and it takes a long time. It's still going on for some people. It's not something that it's going to be instantly, like a non-linear function. It's a slow process.
I have wonderful colleague and friend Martin Camire over at University of Ottawa, and he's a post-humanist. I won't bore listeners with the philosophic basis of post-humanism, but what he does advocate for is changing our language. So I'll give you an idea. If I was to say the word education, that conjures a lot of experiences that you've all had with education. We often think, when I say education, straight away, your mind's probably drawn to schooling. And as a result of that, you're probably thinking of a teacher standing in front of a classroom, transmitting this respective information.
Yeah.
Now, his argument is we should abolish that word altogether, come up with a new word, right? And come up with a new way. If we're to overhaul education, well, let's come up with a new way of talking about it. I'm less inclined with that, and I'm more inclined to, and one of the reasons I'm less inclined with that is by changing our language, we immediately delimit the people that we can talk to, right? So we create a bit of an echo chamber for ourselves. I'm more inclined to reconceptualize, reconfigure words that have these really really path-dependent associations, education being one, and attack the root of their interpretation and where they've been lost in translation somewhere along the way. So rather than talking about education from a sense of instilling or transmitting in, there's another interpretation that we could look at in this process of leading out and exposing people to things such that they can experience things for themselves. So to your point, Keith, exactly that. Maybe there's this need to reconceptualize, which leads to different ways or alternate ways of doing. And I guess the caution that I often yield is not to espouse those as better or worse, just to demonstrate that they're different, that they're an alternative, and let's explore the implications of that difference.
Well, see, that discussion there shows exactly what I mean about the subtlety of subversion. Maybe going in and saying abolish the word education would be too strong, because even I agree, it's often linked to formal education, and really the focus for me. This is something that you've mentioned this already. You're involved in a department of learning design at the QAS. And that is a subversive, very subtle way of saying, no, we're not talking about instructing. We're not going to, it's not going to be teacher-centered, coach-centered. It's centered on learning, the learning process, understanding that. And there are different ways of learning, different locations of learning. It can go on. Let's get a rich understanding of all the different places. So let's contextualize it. For me, that is subtle subversion that's going on, rather than just abolish the word. And I mean, blowing it up like that can cause discussion and debate, but instead I think is a bit more effective to subtly change it and challenge people's thinking. Stop using the word instructing, learning designers.
I think it's the same with the words training, practice versus learning. Is it a learning environment? Is it a practice? What does a practice imply? It means we can already do it. We can already do this, so we're just going to keep practicing it till we get it, to perfect it, whatever. What does training mean? Well, you guys have talked about the history of drill, a training drill, and there's a real tension around that word drill, which we only need to go on Twitter and probably get involved in sort of rubbish, but we don't need to. So, but a drill is a way of controlling and a way of instructing a drill, so I totally agree, Keith. And I think this is some of the work from Georgia Askew's PhD, where Ross, this sort of choice to use the term learning designer, learning architect, who you called it, or environment designer, has come from feedback from coaches to Georgia going, skill acquisition specialist is such a limiting term. You do far more than just being a skill acquisition, but it defines you as this, when actually you can provide far more if you were a learning designer. And I think learning designer doesn't just sit with coaches, but it could be that it needs to be done like with your Department of Methodology stuff, Martin, around the S&C, like if, as Carl said before, if this was about moving to achieve a goal, not moving to just make you stronger or make you faster or whatever, this was part of the holistic process, then they become learning designers as well. Then it changes their whole focus.
Well, the word design, and so when I do a lot of coach development now, when you get coaches to think about designing sessions, it's very different. So there's a lot of programming, even in sport. So programming might be more familiar with like triathlon or swimming, where you program in sets and reps. Or certainly in strength and conditioning. But when you use the term, think about designing practice, or I take your point about practice and training, but it's a totally different concept. And that's when you can start, well, what are some principles that can help you think about how you design this practice? Because typically it will be, we do this here, let's just copy the way, if we want a session for finishing, for example, or shooting, here's a session that we always use, or there's no thought around design. It's normally that copy and paste approach. And then you start thinking about, well, who am I coaching? So what's the individual bit that I need? So how do I start challenging individuals within that? So yeah, spot on. I think, if we can shift the thinking a little bit more towards that, it starts to create some really nice conversations and new opportunities for coaches, which is a really important way to go, I think.
I think with that word design as well, Martin, like picking that thread up, I think it really subtly as well speaks to this notion that, like, I can't and this might be, I don't know, it might be contentious. I don't think it is. I can't teach you anything, right? I can't teach you to do anything. At best, I can set up the conditions that enables you to attend to information that then allows you to perform some particular task, right? I'm not teaching you to do anything. I'm educating your attention to things. So by default, if that's the position that I take, well, then the kind of only option that I have is to design something that shines a light or that enables you to pick that relevant information up.
Yes.
But I think we have this belief that coaches, teachers, I mean, the very word teacher denotes that I'm teaching you something, right? Like, how different would schools look like if instead of being teachers, they were designers, right?
Yeah.
How would the actual physical design of the space look? Well, it would be massively different. Would we even have, if we use the word designers, would we even have assessments and curricula? And what would all of these things subsequently look like? I think it's a really fascinating exercise to kind of think with. But again, to me, it comes back to this notion, as someone that's very invested in learning and how people learn to do things, not just people, mind you, how organisms learn to do things. I guess I'm more comfortable these days that I can't teach anyone anything. At best, I can just establish conditions and help establish conditions and help co-design conditions that enable people to take up invitations that hopefully we accentuate or dampen.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And at the essential heart of that is that people need to question what is their model of learning and what is their model of the learning process. And that would, I don't think people do that enough. As Martin said, there's a lot of copying and pasting that goes on, and here's a playbook of drills and sort of practice tasks and ways of instructing, etc. But if you question and really think, well, what is my model of the learner, and how does the learner learn? Then you would start to ask questions like that.
Well, that's a great way to frame it. Well, it'd be more advanced coach education or development is a better way, I think, or even university modules. That they could be three core questions or things that you're going to discuss. So, what is design? And then the 2 points you raised there, Keith. And if you've got a really sort of, even if it's a lot of experiential knowledge and maybe not so much theoretical, you can really start to challenge and think about what is driving those three things, and that had really set some nice conversations up to start unpacking, different ways of doing things. I reckon, yeah. So some great points there, Keith.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Sorry, was you gonna?
No, I just think it's a fascinating conversation. Words are so powerful, aren't they? And the words that you use, both as a coach and the way you when you're working with coaches, the words that you use are incredibly powerful. And I think empathy and trust are huge, and the building the relationship when you're working with anybody is crucial. That underpins whatever theoretical model you have around your coaching approach. And it made me think a bit. Sorry, is that something coming in?
I was just about to say to dovetail that as well. The important words. I often wonder, and it goes back to something you said earlier, Ian. About like the disconnect between high performance and junior sport. I often wonder if that disconnect is associated with some of the words that we use. So think about it as they're very static to denote an endpoint, like talent development or coach development. How would that look if you referred to it as a verb, like coach developing or talent developing? These things that were ongoing, that they don't, because I guess the very notion of coach development or talent development denotes a defined start and then some end that you'd go, oh, okay, now you're a coach that's been developed, or you're an athlete that's been, developed. And that's just not how it goes, you know. Like we don't live our lives reaching these milestones and then all of a sudden that's it, you know. Like, look, take yourself, Ian, and Keith, that have been doing this stuff for decades. Would you say you developed? Well, I'd go on a limb and say absolutely not. You know?
No, I loved you. I'm not sure whether you started using the idea or got it from somewhere else. The idea of you're always becoming. I love
Yeah.
that concept. You're never there, are you? You're never the finished product, because you think you might be, and then you get exposed to something else and you go, actually, I know nothing. And I think that's part of the journey, isn't it? You get confident that you know what you're doing, and then you read more and you go, I don't know what I'm doing. And then you read more and you go, yeah, I know what I'm doing again now. No, I don't. And then you work with somebody else, or you work with a different group of people, and it starts to all start again. So this curiosity, I think, you know, the curiosity. Interesting, Keith's idea of subversion. You know, I like that idea. I'm being quite subversive. I'm not going to risk going to America in the next sort of few years, but I might get short and waste my money. But how do you find when you went into sports? Like, we've all done it. We've gone into sports where there's path dependency. It's very highly, there's a way of doing it, and we've done this for 30 years. We have a fencing coach, Carl, on our podcast, who tell us the coaching books look like one he's got from 1700 or 1800. They're exactly
1800s, yeah.
1800s. Nothing's changed. And I found a cricket book from the 1920s. Nothing's changed. You know, so how do you find when you go in with the new ways of doing it? How do coaches react, and how do you work with them around that? What were your strategies? I guess.
Yeah,
Give us some clues.
Yeah, no, really good question, and I think it's as is the case with all of these. It's not finished, you know. Like every conversation is different, right? And that leads me, and not just with coaches, with other people in terms of how they integrate some of these ideas. All of these things are kind of suspended in becoming. But what I will say is, when I started, I was very hard-handed, right? And that probably just that's probably not not unfamiliar to maybe to other listeners, or we've had similar experiences where I've kind of gone in and been very assertive with what you're doing is good here and it's pretty shit over here, right? And that's very kind of snapshotted from my perspective, standing on the sidelines and kind of observing and going, oh, that looks pretty good. That doesn't. And I'll give you a really good example of kind of where that penny dropped for me. 2018, I was having a chat with Jim Mackay, who you had on the pod before, and we've worked with, and Ian, we've written a piece with. I was shooting some emails backwards and forwards over a piece he'd written with Donna O'Connor, and I was working at Port at the time, and he was really lovely enough to invite myself and another coach up, and goes, I'd love you guys to come up and observe some of our practice, and I'd love to pick your brain on some of this stuff. And I thought, how good is this? I can go and spend some time with a world-class coach and talk to him about some of these ideas. And anyway, went up there, watched one of his practice sessions, and he designed this practice session or this practice activity around facilitating offloads and practicing offloads with the Queensland Reds. And I remember, I can't remember at the time, I can't remember now, but he'd put a constraint in that I felt was very artificial, and basically it was similar to like a two-touch constraint in soccer, right? And so I felt like he was generating these offloads in a very artificial way. And I remember thinking at the time, like, yes, sweet, there's my in. That's I can say, Jim, loved your session, but nah, that was no good. We gotta fix this up. And before we'd even got off the pitch, you know, I'd kind of gone down to him and said, Jim, you know, he's gone, what are your thoughts on the session? I said, Jim, loved this, this, and this. But, and before I'd even got that out, he goes, you're going to pick up the offloading activity, aren't you? And I said, yeah, like, mate, that's way too constrained. You're constraining here and you're actually reducing opportunities for players. And he said, no. From my experience in using this particular constraint and integrating this particular constraint with this particular playing group that I have, That's a trade-off I'm willing to take, because in my experience with these guys, it's actually a really conducive way to getting them to start to get them to explore different ways of doing. If I over constrain it, it almost encourages additional exploration on top of what I would use if it was a less constraining manipulation. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, he's a very experienced, well-established coach. By that stage, had coached the Wallabies. And who am I? I'm a 31-year-old at this stage, going like, nah, you're wrong. This is, this theory and this approach that I'm advocating for is right, and what you're doing is wrong. And I remember that being a real, a penny drop moment of less going in to interrogate and pick apart, and more going into what I now have learned is an intransitive verb, commenting, finding in common, casting my perceptions and experiences out in a way that a coach can respond to them. And hopefully they do so in a way which enables me to respond. And what that does is it opens up a language of a vernacular that we can find common ground, and hopefully bring these ideas to life in a way that is theoretically sound, but experientially sound as well. And bleed that into my time at Port Adelaide. And I said in earlier on, at the end of 2018, we set about revamping our performance preparation framework, becoming a lot more ecological with how we do things. I didn't refer to that I didn't refer to affordances. I didn't refer to direct perception. I didn't even really refer to constraints that much. What we termed this performance preparation framework, which bled across the organisation, again, to borrow some stuff from Jim, was heads up footy. And from my perspective, working with the coaches, that language conjured this perspective, or as Keith would say, this model of a learner where the players, their heads are up, they're attending to information from my perspective, or as the coaches would say, their head was on a swivel. They're looking at things and they're playing the game as it unfolds in front of them, right? From my perspective, that enabled me to join in a conversation and establish a conversation that was theoretically informed, but to do so in a way that harnessed the experiential knowledge of practitioners. So I guess when I go into sports these days, I kind of start from that perspective of trying to find in common first, without coming in heavy and hard-handed, because to me at least, there's an inherent humility with growing older. There's a hell of a lot that I don't know. So I'd be more inclined to want to listen to what people that are on the ground doing it have to say, and then see how I can join in those conversations thereafter.
It's a great point around. Sorry, Marty, I just could say it's a great point around looking for it. It's a strengths-based approach, looking for what you're doing well, rather than traditional view of a coach. Therefore, a coach, educator, supporter is to go in and look for the deficits. What are you doing wrong? Why am I even starting from that point? What are you doing brilliantly? What can we add to your repertoire? What could we add? Not what can we change or take away. What can we add to you? That's really.
It's working with a curiosity, isn't it? Just picking up on some words. And as well, the great example that Cole shared there, I think that can start to advance the theoretical side of things as well. This combination of empirical insights, but also experiential. And it's, did you call it leading out before, or? Yeah, it's almost that, isn't it? If you're starting from a position of that, rather than, no, I've got all the answers and I'll follow my checklist, and do you know what I mean? That back to the old traditional coach education model. So yeah, it's much of a more meaningful way of working with coaches for sure. Yeah, definitely.
It reminds me of Keith's approach when he was mentoring us, in the first place. So your concept of going alongside, being alongside somebody, and the old traditional sort of idea of apprenticeship or mentorship, whatever word it is, where I go along with the chief hunter and I'm a little kid on the side, and most of the time I spend time watching. And then when they think I'm ready, they go, "You go and do that little thing over there." And then you go, "Oh, I'm in," and then slowly and more you're brought into the middle. And then this is what Keith did with us. I want you to just write me a little piece here. What? like just give me a paragraph here. You go, all right, bang, and I'm in. And then next time, can you write this section here? Bang, you're in. Like, and it builds your confidence, and it makes you, it develops your skills, and you go from there. And before you know it, you're leading one. And that's similar
I
to
think,
academia as in coaching, I guess.
yeah, from listeners that have an academic bent, that's why from a postgraduate perspective, in Australia we often refer to like academic supervisors and candidates, PhD candidates. The very word like supervisor doesn't sit where I prefer advisor. Like it's
Yeah.
we're advising, we're kind of guiding, and that starts or that comes from an element of trying to expose people to things. But to your point, Martin, um, I guess you could look at my transition into working with coaches has gone from this view where mastery leads and submission follows to now the flip of that, in that submission leads and mastery follows. And by that, I mean, I go in going, I know nothing here. I'm just going to do my best to try to hang on to whatever I can hear and join in where I can. And a lot of the time that results in me going, yeah, look, you're doing a lot right. I'm not really sure how we can intervene here, or very rarely do coaches have pointed, I need assistance in this particular area. That's not that common. It's more, I think I need some help. Come in and watch what I do, and let's have a conversation or a coffee after in terms of what maybe you noticed. But I always, again, I start with I wrote about this with Craig Morris. I start with an epistemology of not knowing, rather than coming in trying to think I already know what I'm going to see and experience. And by not knowing, straight away you open yourself to an attentiveness that goes wherever your nose goes, I guess.
Yeah, brilliant. The naive observer, isn't it? I love that. The naive researcher. Yeah. Tell me about this, because I don't understand. You might do, but you're not letting on.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant. It's been a fantastic conversation, this. But I think we've got to wrap it up.
Well, it's gone dark where Carl is, and I'm assuming it's the same for you, Ian. It's getting lighter here. So yeah, but well, maybe when Carl's not as busy, definitely a part 2 and part 3 probably and more. But yeah. But yeah,
No.
really appreciate. I mean, I feel we've not even started yet. We've not even got into some of the more about the applied work. But anyway, yeah, we'll save that for another time, hopefully.
Thank you for giving up your time, Carl. And
yeah,
this is a bit of a break from feeding and changing nappies and everything. So for that, Carl he's got a 3-week-old little boy, Charlie, at the moment. So life's changed.
You talk about the humility of things. I tell you, there's nothing more humbling than having a baby screaming at you at 2 a.m. and having no idea what to do. So,
isn't that true? Yeah.
Oh, it's one hell of an experience. So, but no, it's look, as I said at the start, it's always a joy jumping on podcasts, but specifically with both of you and Keith. I mean, it's it's great fun. The stuff you guys are doing is awesome. So happy to help, and hopefully throw a few things out there that listeners might jump on. If not, no worries.
Yeah,
great.
Exactly. Thanks, Carl. And
thank you.
bye for now. Bye.